Welcome to another show of CISO Chat with the Accounts County chapter. My name is Victor Monga. I am acting as host of this program. With me, I have Quincy Collins. Quincy, why don't we start with a quick introduction?
So my name is Quincy Collins. I'm the Chief Security Officer of Shepherd Mullen Richter in Hampton. We're a large law firm based out of Los Angeles, but we do have an international reach.
So you get problems from international and local as well. So perfect guy to talk about cloud security.
Absolutely.
All right, why don't we just jump right into it? Quincy, around cloud migration, I think we all have joined that around 2012, 2010 timeframe, and until 2015, people were confused. What is cloud migration? What is cloud journey looks like? And starting later 2015 to 2020, I should say, we started worrying about cloud security. And one of the challenges now, people have moved their giant elephant applications to cloud. What are the cloud security? And so I'm going to start with the data lifecycle because that's something is a lot of organizations missed, I would say, because they considered that a cloud is cloud vendor problem. And we all have heard and listened to shared responsibility and what that model looks like. But why don't we just start there, data lifecycle in cloud?
Absolutely. Um, Even going back to what you were just saying about, what is often missed, a lot of organizations are going to jump into their cloud journey and just think of it from a workload perspective or from a virtual machine perspective or possibly an application perspective. But if we dig into it deeper, there are many data flows that are associated with those cloud workloads or those virtual machines or even those APIs. So it's very important to understand what data you have, who has access to it, and where that data is going to live and how that data is going to move through the entire data lifecycle. And when I say data lifecycle, I mean the circular motion that data tends to take when we have data that's created, when data is shared, how it is used, how it is archived, and then how it is being destroyed. So, you can kind of make it into a circle or some type of cyclical fashion in order to understand how that moves. And organizations really have to consider um, data, where it lives, who has access to it at each step, and how data is treated and how data must be treated with regards to regulations and laws, both domestic and international. So when we think about creating data, who has access to make those changes on that cloud platform? For example, who should have access? Who shouldn't have access to create data, to create new files? Let's, for example, look at a bank. Who has the ability in their cloud platform to create a new bank account? Are there rules against people doing said activities? Looking at sharing data. Um, Understanding who has the ability to share that data, where that data is being shared to, and with whom that data is being shared with. Organizations can get into a lot of trouble if their users are able to share data out to unauthorized entities, especially if it's export controlled data. The next step with regard to use of data. So next we're talking about the use of data, and that goes to how data is being utilized in the organization. So how far that footprint of all of the data reaches in the organization, who is able to store that data on different servers, different machines, where that data is able to go, where it's able to live, and then moving on to archiving data. Now, every system, at least if it's critical data, should be backed up and archived somewhere for a specific set of time. You want to make sure that only the authorized individuals are going to have access to that data that's archived in some storage location. Additionally, you're going to want to make sure that it's encrypted appropriately. And then you want to make sure onto the next topic or the next subject is destruction or destroying of the data. So how do you actually destroy the data in a cloud fashion in a cloud system? Are you going to use crypto erasure? Are you just going to wipe it from the systems? And then additionally, is it totally wiped from the system? And then are you going to destroy the archives as well? Because the archives are typically stored somewhere else, depending on how your backups are set up. So, and looking at the data lifecycle, it's vitally important to understand the whole entire data lifecycle and what the implications are for your organization.
That's a key, I think you touched upon very good, Quincy, about policies and procedures, right? Like make sure that you have your procedures nailed down because everybody had a good cadence what they need to do for on-prem because you can touch and feel your hard drives, you know where they are. In cloud is completely different. Where is your data exactly? We don't know where it's written. Where are those boot sectors? And also, how can you destroy it? And if it's actually destroyed, if you need to actually prove it to an auditor, how would you prove it, right?
Absolutely. Um, an organization must have policies and procedures that are in line with their business processes. Organizations can sometimes get into trouble if they have a process that is not formalized. And what could end up happening is that one side of your organization, let's say your West Coast, is doing things differently than your East Coast, and that might have an effect on your business somehow if individuals are doing things incorrectly. At the very least, there will be a difference in the service level that is provided to your users or possibly your clients, and that's never good. It's always good to have a wonderful expected result whenever you're dealing with data, whenever you're dealing with service levels. So policies and procedures are, you kind of got to start there. And additionally, it makes it so that individuals aren't going to kind of go it on their own, right? If there's no defined process, people tend to become creative, and that's a lot of times how security incidents, can occur.
I love it. When people try to be creative and there's no set procedure or process or policies, creativity is good, but in a development and control environment, not in your production environment. So,
Absolutely.
continuing with the theme of creativity and what can go wrong or what is being monitored in your cloud, a lot of times we have seen organizations where they have quote unquote logging and monitoring, and that's a big area that companies can interpret. It's very subjective. So, CISO, what would you think that we should allow our audience to kind of have the insights about logging and monitoring in cloud?
So, logging and monitoring is probably one of the most impactful things that you can do from a security perspective, and that's a operational security perspective, and from an incident response perspective. If you don't have logs, and we could kind of back this up and define what is a log, right? A log is a characterization of what happened in some sort of data flow or between two accounts or some activity that is occurring on your network. So you're going to have a log. It's like a diary of sorts that occurs, and it's a source of truth. A lot of times, as long as it has not been tampered with by an attacker. So, I kind of follow this rule. If I can get a log, I'm going to take and I'm going to store the log. Obviously, you don't want to store too many logs because then it's going to be you don't want to have to search on 1 terabyte or 2 terabytes or 10 terabytes of data when you could just as soon search on 500 gigs of data, thus making your searches optimized and a lot faster. But security practitioners, me included, would rather have more logs than less logs. And then, speaking of logs specifically, you want to ensure that your logs are parsed correctly. You want to make sure that they're readable, both machine readable and readable to your operators who are going to be searching on them and making sense of what is occurring in your logs. Organizations can sometimes get into trouble by storing those logs, never looking at those logs, and then an incident occurs, and then they go back, they rush into their cloud SIM or their cloud logging and monitoring solution that's built by one of the large cloud providers, and then they don't understand what they have. A big part of logging and monitoring is actually understanding your data, making sure that it's displayed correctly, that you understand what all of the fields actually mean, and then that way you're able to paint a picture of what is occurring or what has occurred in your environment. You're going to be way ahead of the game if you can just understand your data from an authentication standpoint, from an access standpoint, um, from changes in your environment, perhaps. Um, those logs are like gold, and if they're parsed correctly, if they are understood by your IT department and your information security department, you are going to be well ahead of the game.
I agree 100%. Logging is it can be tedious, and we have seen that era where log everything and don't worry about it. To your point, I think make sure those logs are readable, human readable and machine readable. That's the key. And get some intel, actionable intel out of those logs. Don't just store them because that can get you in trouble. Like, let's say if you are CCPA compliant company, and if you're collecting logs for an IP address that can attribute to a person, you are in a trouble. So to your point, Quincy, I think make sure you know what you're logging. Make sure if you are looking at those and how you actually get actionable intel out of it.
Absolutely. Agree 100%.
Now, we talked about the data lifecycle, we talked about policies and procedures, we talked about logging and monitoring. Now, next comes to every executive's mind is what if still things go wrong? We did everything what we could and still things go wrong, which is incidents. It's inevitable. And it's going to happen in cloud as well, unless Quincy, you tell me cloud is to incidents.
I certainly will not say that that the cloud is immune to incidents. But what I will say is that if you prepare yourself and your organization for an incident, whether it be on-prem or in the cloud, um, you will have a situation where your incident response flow will go a lot smoother. Um, your incidents will typically be less severe, and your reporting and situational awareness will be at a much, much higher level than if you had not prepared appropriately. Now, I particularly like the SANS IR guidance. There are many other organizations that provide guidance. NIST has a incident computer security incident handling guide that is great as well. I think that organizations should really pick one framework that they like, use that framework, and then pick on the other documents that are out there from organizations in the world and use that to kind of improve their base document. So you kind of got to use Bruce Lee's methodology, right? You've got to take in all the information, and then you've got to utilize what is useful, and then set aside the things that are not useful to your organization. With regard to the SANS IR guidance, they have a 6-step process. It's preparation, identification, containment, eradication, recovery, and lessons learned. Now, preparation is the number one thing that you're going to have to spend time on. I think that's where the bulk of your time should be from any incident response perspective. In the preparation phase, you essentially prepare to handle incidents, and then there's even a space before preparation, and that's just general information security. So that's prevention. That's preventing an actual incident, right? So a lot of companies and individual security practitioners will say, oh, okay, yeah, we've got this great incident response policy, incident response flow. We've got all of these different run books, both manual and automated. But wouldn't it be awesome if you didn't have to deal with an incident in the first place, right? So preparing for and actually having a very strong security posture is the very first step. It's a pre-step before you look at incident response, because you don't necessarily want to be chasing ambulances and activating your incident response policy every day or every week or every month, right? You want to have a very robust security environment, both on-prem and in the cloud. And then you jump into your incident response flow. And that's where, we start with preparation, right? So you've got to understand who's going to be on your incident handling team, what tools you're going to use, what outside help you're going to have, and then understand how you're going to communicate with individuals, both internal and external to your organization. Your data breach response team or incident response team is probably going to have your IT people, your information security people, probably your legal team, your executive team, might have an external PR company to handle the flow of information. You'll probably have a third party forensics company or incident response company to handle things that your security department might not be able to handle, or if there's something that's outside of their scope. So, for example, deconstructing malware quickly, right? Or possibly looking at threat actor attribution. That's another thing that might be outside of the scope of a small security team. So that preparation phase is going to be key, because it's going to lay the groundwork for all the additional phases after that. So we look at identification in this incident response flow. You actually have to identify an incident. You have to understand what's happening. And that goes back to our conversation beforehand, right? Logging and monitoring. A lot of times, you're not going to know if something is happening or not if you don't have appropriate logging and monitoring. In addition to that, you're going to have endpoint security, firewalls, and all of those things. But the base of situational awareness and identification of an incident is going to be logging and monitoring. So all of your tools are going to feed into that logging and monitoring solution, which will help you identify an incident. You want to make sure and understand the attack vectors, which IP addresses or which applications are in scope, which systems are in scope. And then you want to prioritize and understand how you're going to notify individuals in that identification phase. After that, you're going to move over to the containment phase. And this is where you want to make a choice, right? You're either going to clean and clear, or you're going to wait and watch in this containment phase, right? So when I say clean and clear, you're actually going to clear the environment of the attacker. You're going to find their IP addresses, their hashes, understand their tradecraft and how they're actually doing whatever it is that they're doing in your environment, and you're going to stop it. The other way that you can handle containment is to wait and watch, or watch and learn. And then with that particular one is a little. Sometimes it's very helpful to wait and watch, because you can understand a lot of things that are occurring in your environment. I'm a fan of clean and clear immediately, but sometimes, depending on the advice that you receive from your third party incident responders, you're going to want to wait and watch and learn from what the adversary is doing in your environment in order to get a better understanding of what's happening, so that you can absolutely move to the eradication phase without any issues or problems. If you move too quick to clean and clear, they might still have some remnants of something on your systems or in your network that you might not be aware of. And then moving to the eradication phase, this is where you do your research and take a look at all of the different vectors of attack to make sure that you have for sure removed the threat actors from your environment, from your application, from your servers or your network. You want to make sure that you go over all of the logs, right? And it's gonna be a reoccurring theme here when we talk about logs, right? Because if your logging posture is very strong, right? If you're getting logs from all of your systems, application logs, web server logs, SQL server logs, security logs, that is going to allow you to understand what exactly is happening in your environment. So you really want to start with logging so that you can, move yourself and your organization through this incident response flow quickly and completely. So after you eradicate the threat actor from your environment, and the eradication phase might take a while. It might take a few days, right? You contain first, and then you eradicate. Eradicate meaning you take a deeper dive just to make sure that you have truly kicked the attacker out of your environment. The next step is going on to recovery. This is where you recover those systems that you likely brought down in your containment phase, right? When trying to contain the attacker. And in the recovery phase, it's very very important to watch those systems very very closely to understand if the attacker is still in your environment. Maybe they dropped some malicious scripts. Maybe you missed an IP address, destination IP address. Maybe they're using domain fronting and they're using some content delivery network. You really never know. And when you bring up a service after it has been shut down, or you're rebuilding your environment and you're recovering your environment after some catastrophic event, the worst thing that you can do is recover too soon, and then the attacker is still in your environment, and whatever happened happens again, right? Because then you've just kind of lost time again. So in that recovery phase, you really want to work closely with your third party incident response team. Hopefully you have one on retainer to help you recover with an appropriate level of surety that your systems will not be attacked again. And then lastly, the lessons learned. This is just as important. All of the phases are important, right? But beginning to end, preparation most important. You want to prepare, and that preparation is you writing out this policy, right? And writing out this guidance for your organization, this whole entire 6-step process. But looking at the lessons learned, it's very, very important that after this incident has been deemed closed, right, you learn from this incident and understand how your organization can improve from what just happened to the organization. If it's additional staffing, if it's secure configuration issues, if you had some insecure configurations that caused this, maybe it's a configuration management problem. Maybe somebody made a change in your environment which led to this incident or breach. The lessons learned is like gold. And speaking of lessons learned, you can learn lessons from other organizations that have been breached. It doesn't have to be um, just your breach, right? You can look at some of the major breaches that occurred over the last 3 to 4 to 5 years and take a look at the common themes, whether it's phishing emails, vendor security issues, supply chain security, um, potentially ransomware, and take a look at the controls that can help prevent these things from happening again. So lessons learned is absolutely huge in my book. Learning from others and learning from your own environment is definitely key.
I think you brought up a really good point. We don't need to wait until something happens to us to in order to either get the lesson learned or even start considering for incident response. We can learn from other organizations. There are a lot of them that have gone through any sort of breach and they have presented their findings, and we all can learn from it. And I think the key one thing I want to highlight, based on what you mentioned, to all of our audience is commit to one framework. So I've seen organizations, they start with one framework, and in the middle of it, they're like, you know what, why don't we just notch it up and go to the next framework? And then they start working on it. Then they're like, yeah, we don't have budget, we don't have staff. Maybe let's choose a different framework, which is more for our palette. So I think the key here, and Quincy, correct me if I'm wrong, that commit to one framework, go through it, and then figure out if you want to go up or down from there.
You have to start from where you are. One thing that you just said or you just mentioned is, we don't have the staffing, we don't have the budget, right? But there are many security controls that you can do, which are free, right? You can make secure configurations on your systems for free. You can remove deprecated protocols for free. You can use URL categorization if your firewall supports it for free. You can use application whitelisting if that's your thing. You can. There are so many things that you can do for free in your environment, but it's very, very important that you start from where you are. So that's situational awareness and understanding the maturity level of your organization, if it's low, medium, high, and understanding how you get to the next level. So even organizations that have a high level of incident response capability, information security capabilities, and then they have really large security teams. They can always improve. So from and this is something that is important as a security practitioner. You always have to continuously improve, whether it's yourself in your own skills and your own knowledge in the field. Nobody knows everything, and everybody is still learning. But from an organizational standpoint, it's vitally important that you understand where you are, know where you want to go, and then map out how you're going to get there with the resources that you currently have, right? And with resources that you might have to ask for, right? So,
Absolutely.
sometimes you're going to have to, you're going to have to go to the board or whoever it is that you report to as a security practitioner and say, hey, here are the risks in our environment. This is the roadmap to get there, and this is what we need in order to get there within this time frame. Right? It's all about full disclosure.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think in cloud, keeping up the journey and the theme of this talk, in cloud, there's a lot of times when we would have to partner with other vendors. So even though if you're using one public or private cloud, then you would have to manage or connect with other partners, either API or one way or the other. So vendor management in cloud, really a crucial point. And I think, Kunsi, that's something we really need to kind of harp on. What does that look like? What are the gotchas of vendor management in the cloud? Because nobody actually reads those lengthy contracts unless I'm not going to say that I have read it or not, but no one reads it. So what are the gotchas as a CISO that you would recommend for audience for vendor management in the cloud?
I think that it starts with reading the contract, right? Your vendor management has to actually encapsulate the entire process. Much like the data lifecycle, there is a vendor lifecycle as well. And that starts with the contract. That also moves on to what the actual tool or service or cloud vendor does for said organization. Now, when you assess a vendor from a security perspective, not all vendors are going to have to go through the same assessment process. Some vendors, that don't deal with sensitive data, that don't have a direct connection or some sort of connection or link to your environment, can actually go through a more streamlined process. Whereas a vendor that might have remote access to your organization, or a vendor that might have access to your critical assets, for example, and critical data, and whatever access that they have, if somebody were to use that, it would be very damaging to the organization, right? So those types of organizations should and will go through a more rigorous assessment framework to ensure the security of your data, the confidentiality and integrity of your business operations. So I think it starts with understanding uh, you know what the vendor is actually doing, reading the contract, taking a look at the actual makeup of the system or of the service or technology that you're going to be utilizing, and really making an objective uh, decision and saying, hey, uh, we need to make sure that we put them through each and every single process here that we have, each tool that we have to our advantage from an assessment standpoint, and say, hey, we want to understand, if you've had a penetration test, we want to know about database segmentation. We want to know about your cadence for vulnerability scanning. We want to know about, where your development is taking place and what is your software development life cycle like. So, there's a lot of things that, come along with vendor management. In the cloud specifically, you want to look at, are they using a public cloud instance? Are they using a private cloud? Is it some sort of hybrid? Are there APIs involved? What does the data flow look like? What type of encryption are they using? um, you know Once you ask the questions, and you don't actually have to ask 1,000 questions on a spreadsheet. You can ask the things that are very important, that will give you an idea if you should look deeper or not, and then go from there. So, best practices, absolutely put your vendors through some sort of assessment framework, starting with the contract itself, taking a look at the organization itself. How long have they been around? That's another one. Are they a company that just started 6 months ago? Do they have any policies and procedures? Do they have a security team? What kind of data are you going to be sharing with them? There are so many things that you can do to give yourself and give your organization a good look at at understanding the posture, both from a security standpoint, BCDR standpoint, business continuity and disaster recovery, and from a overall, is this company the right fit? Is this tool, is this technology a right fit for our environment? So vendor management is huge. Looking at what happened with SolarWinds, very unfortunate um, event. What happened to them with persistent attackers that were highly capable. But I will say that SolarWinds is not going to be the only company that is going to be breached in that manner. It will happen again. And as an industry, we have to, do what we can to ask those questions. And the more that we ask those, poignant questions to these organizations, the higher likelihood of these organizations, increasing their security posture and making changes where, their compliance framework in which they operate might leave some gaps.
I think that's the key, right? In vendor management, it's not just about getting the PO signed and paying the invoices. It's really about understanding the SLAs, really understanding that legal terminology. So you should definitely partner with your legal team when you're signing a vendor or even researching a vendor, and really understand what does that mean when they put those information in contract, those verbiage, the wordings. What are the gray areas? If they are, then maybe you want to discuss it up front. If there are any potential risks or liability that you are exposing yourself to. So let's say if you are a company who is providing services to other customers, and you are telling your customer that I will have it up and running for 7 days a week, all day, every day, and you're using a cloud infrastructure who are claiming that the service will be up 95%. Now you can see where you're exposing yourself. So really understand that vendor management and what are the exposures.
I think one exposure that I neglected to mention before was vendor lock-in, right? So in a cloud contract, a lot of times you're going to have to ship your data to
Yeah.
them. And if it's a large amount of data, you've got to really pay attention to your contract and understand what the implications are for your company if you ever decide to leave that service. So, is there a cost to ship data out? Is it a high cost? Is it astronomical? Is it, is that contract built to make it so that you will likely never leave? Is there an out fee, just a simple fee, just to get out? And is the data that you're utilizing in that platform only used in that platform? And if it's some special data type, getting that data converted to another data type to another vendor could be another huge cost, and it could actually impact your business. And then lastly, what happens if that company goes out of business? And I'm speaking specifically of private cloud. If that company is utilizing their own um, cloud infrastructure, apart from some of the major Microsoft, Google, Amazon. What happens if that company goes out of business, right? So you've got to take a look and understand what the implications are, not only for, hey, when everything is good, but when things are bad and if you want to leave. And that's where having a stellar legal team can really help you um, make a difference in in what happens when these emergencies and these cloudy skies come your way.
Yeah, what a wonderful things to remember, right? When we're thinking about cloud journey. So Quincy, you know what? Let's wrap up our session by talking about the partnership. So let's say an organization, they have a public or private cloud consumption and they have a strategy going on, but I believe that organizations should really look at cloud as in, or learn from organizations who are vendor agnostic, platform agnostic, to understand really what are the complications when it comes to it. So why don't you shed some light on the active partnership when it comes to cloud journey, cloud migration, or maybe even cloud security?
Sure. So I'm going to split this into two different sections. So when I think of active partnership, I think of active partnership with vendors, with technology providers. So that's B2B essentially, and working with those technology partners that you have, and making sure that it's a value add to your organization and a value add to the partner as well. I also think about the internal active partnership, the active partnership that you have, especially in between the information security department at your company or your firm, and the information technology departments as well. And that's how you can be a partner, an active partner with your team, and essentially be an active partner for your organization. So on the vendor standpoint, it's always about relationships. Um, it's about asking. It's about not asking for something in return. And this is directly from the vendor. This is how a vendor can be an active partner to your organization. The vendor has to check in with you from time to time. Has to offer interesting white papers. They should offer to do sessions to help you understand the product that you've purchased from them more. Nothing is worse than having a vendor only reach out to you um, when it's time to renew. Right? You've got X amount of dollars on the line for them. It's their final. It's their final week in the quarter, and then they see that you haven't renewed yet, so now they want to reach out to you. They want to ask if you need additional resources, and by that time, a lot of times it's probably too late, right? You
Yeah,
have to connect.
and they do dangle with they come bearing gifts, and everybody's like, oh yeah, let's. It's a sweet carrot approach.
Exactly, and that turns it into a very transactional relationship, where you're not really connecting with people, and the organization. You're just connecting with the dollars, right? You've got to be the type of person that the other side or the other team wants to actually speak to and communicate with and hang with, essentially. I mean, obviously, you're not going to be best friends with everybody, but the relationships really do matter. And then next up, you've got to do your research. from a vendor perspective, you've got to do your research on the organization. What are the pain points? What are the different things in the vertical that a company is going to need? Have meaningful conversations rather than just, oh, we have a new product that I want to share with you, right? It's all about providing value and understanding what the client or what the customer needs. And then, lastly, value based activities. So I talked a little bit about white papers earlier that vendors can provide, and these are informational papers that they can send, but they can also do video conferences. For different configuration possibilities or different types of setups or what have you, just depending on what it is that that vendor does. So essentially, how do you use the product, or how do you take more value from the product? They can send emails, they can do CBT training, they can have capture the flag events or user groups, and the list goes on and on. So from a vendor perspective, there are a lot of things um, that they can do in order to be an active partner. And it is a two-way street, right? The organization has to be receptive to that communication. The individuals in that organization have to be receptive. But it's very, very important that, the vendors take a first step to, really try to bring in and create a community around their products. And it's better for everyone that way. And then moving on to how IT teams and information security teams can partner, I think it's all about communication. The first step to this is actually being, actually it's about not doing something. Don't be a jerk, right? A lot of people have information to share, and different people will take different communication streams differently. So it's important to kind of understand where somebody is, and maybe they had a bad day, maybe they you know are going through something, right? You want to make sure and treat everyone like a human being. You want to be a good partner, and that means that you're not going to communicate in a way that looks confrontational. You're not going to be the type of person that is very accusatory, or the type of person that wants to create conflict, right? You want to solve problems together. So communication is going to be number one when we look at information technology teams and information security teams and how they can be a value add. Next up is sharing of information, and this is huge from for providing value. As I was kind of alluding to before, information security is kind of predicated on logs. You need something to look at in order to understand what is currently happening. From those logs, you can create reports, you can create dashboards, you can create different types of documents that provide charts or maps that provide situational awareness, which will help an organization, both the IT department and information security department, understand what is happening. So, one example, you can create a weekly report or biweekly report or daily report of admin activity, system administrators doing something, making a change, adding someone to a group, or what have you. And you can kind of select the ones that are most important or most impactful to your organization. You can take a look at different statistics on changes in the environment, in um, uh, the status of different tools or different systems. And the information security department, since they're collecting so many logs, they can provide this information relatively easily if their SIM or their monitoring tools support it. So that's a few ways that you can essentially provide value utilizing your security stack. Additionally, if you have some sort of automation technology in your environment, you could then, after you've created your automations from a security perspective, you can then start using your automation technology or your SOAR to essentially provide value through automating IT tasks. So you can use your tools for yourself, right, from an automation perspective. But then you can also spend some time to automate some security, non-security tasks, some IT tasks, if it's within the span of possibility or within the realm of possibility to help out your IT department. So you've got to provide value where you can. Obviously, you don't want to decrease the amount of time you're looking at security related events and activity, but where you can provide a dashboard, when you can provide some information, or where you can provide some automation capability, it's really just going to increase the level of partnership, the amount of trust, and the flow of information between the different departments in an organization. You never know, how important it is to have a log until you absolutely need it, or have a report until you absolutely need it. So, working together, it'll make sure that everyone is successful.
Well said, and completely agree with all the points. And I think our audience and listeners must be agreeing with you at this point as well. So I think this is the perfect note to wrap this session. And what do you think?
Thanks, Victor. I really appreciate you having me on this chat, this discussion, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, and on behalf of ISAC Orange County Chapter Board, I thank you for your time and valuable insights. Thanks so much.
Thank you.